Hi, I'm Brickroad, and here we are once again in Princess Peach's foyer, which must mean I have another Villainous deck to show you. This is the third of now 9 planned Final Fantasy Villainous decks that I have completed, and this one's a bit of a doozy. This is going to be enjoyable. This is Garland. Garland is the main villain of Final Fantasy I. You see him here in his artwork when he's transformed into his final boss chaos form, and I've stated that I didn't produce any of these decks without having a solid idea. Like, I started with what's a cool idea for a Villainous deck, and then moved on to, okay, what Final Fantasy villain best encompasses that idea. I didn't do that with Garland for 2 reasons. The first reason is I knew I had to have Garland in this game because he's the original Final Fantasy villain. He's the villain from Final Fantasy I. And the other reason is this is the first deck that I started to design, even before I had a really firm grasp on how all the game mechanics of Villainous work. So this is the deck that's had the most refinement so far, and we've got it into a very interesting place, which we'll talk about in a minute. Let's go through Garland's villain guide here. Garland's objective is begin your turn with 4 fiends, but no light warriors at 2,000 years ago. You see here on his board, 2,000 years ago is one of the 4 locations he can travel to. So in order to win the game, he has to play all 4 fiends to that spot, wait for his turn to come back around, and then at the start of his turn, if he's got all his fiends and there's no light warriors there, he wins the game. Fiends and Light Warriors are special kinds of cards. Fiends are allies that have a special designation, and Light Warriors are heroes that have a special designation. And the reason for this is that there are cards that target allies, but there are also cards that specifically target fiends. So what's important to note here is that fiends are allies and Light Warriors are heroes. Garland has a special rule in that if he moves to 2,000 years ago at the end of his turn, typically at that point you take all your actions and then draw back up to 4 cards in your hand. Garland was allowed to draw back up to 6 cards as long as he ends his turn in that location. When his turn comes back around, though, if he still has more than 4 cards, he has to move to the Temple of the Fiends and discard back down to 4. You see the Temple of the Fiends has the discard action there, but if there's a hero in that location, he's not able to gain power or fate, there's not really a lot else going on. There's a card in his deck that makes this particular move a little bit less punitive, but we'll get to that when we go through his deck. The 4 orbs are items in Garland's deck, which we'll go into in some detail. These are incredibly useful and very, very central to his win mechanic, and it's one of the things that my playtesters have told me make this deck so fun. And finally, there's just a special note here about a couple of cards, because Garland is unique in all of the Villainous decks that I've seen in that he can remove cards from the game. He's got 2 different ways to do this, and this is, again, very central to his win mechanic, because defeating a Light Warrior puts it back in the Fate deck, potentially it gets reshuffled, comes back into the game, but if you remove a Light Warrior from the game, that's 1 less Light Warrior you ever have to worry about seeing again. I have an important note here. This actually came up in playtesting. When you remove a Light Warrior from the game, you're not defeating that hero. You're just removing them. There's a lot of effects that only occur when you defeat a hero. Garland has a way to bypass all of that, get rid of a hero. He never has to see them again. So let's go through Garland's villain deck now and see what he's got to work with. His first card here is the Time Loop. This is what makes that move to the Temple of the Fiends a little bit less punitive. When he takes a discard action in the Temple of the Fiends and Time Loop is played there, he gains power for each card he discards. So one way Garland can get through his deck very quickly is to play Time Loop to the Temple of the Fiends, move to 2,000 years ago, draw up to 6 cards. Next turn, he's got to move back, and if he throws away all 6 cards in that location, he can walk out of that with 6 power. This is good for 2 reasons. One, you've got to get through this deck fast to look for those fiends and play them to your board. And second, this puts a lot of power on the table and gives Garland a lot of options. So my players really like using that Time Loop mechanic, and he's got 2 of these cards in his deck. Next we have the 4 orbs. Each of these orbs has a special function all of its own. For example, the Orb of Wind puts a play a card action on the board. But they also each have an activate action, where you activate an orb, you can search your villain deck for the fiend that matches that orb and put them directly in your hand. So going through the deck, you've actually got 2 chances to stumble across each fiend. You can either find the fiend regularly, or you can find the orb and then activate it and get that fiend ready to go. Garland has this power gauntlet. This you attach to an ally along with cards from your hand, and the ally gains strength equal to however many cards you put into play. This is good, again, for 2 reasons. A lot of Garland's cards have 2 different reasons they're good to play. First, it puts a really powerful ally on the board, which you can use to take care of a Light Warrior. And second, it gets cards out of your hand without having to play them or take a discard action. That's really good when you're trying to get through the deck fast. This is one more option to see as many cards as possible to see those fiends come out. Garland has 2 of these floaters. These are important because usually when you play a fiend, you'll play them directly where they need to go, but there are reasons you might play them to some other location. And then when you take a move ally action, you can only move them 1 space at a time. If you're in that situation, Garland has 2 of these floaters. This means you can take a move ally action and immediately get your fiend directly where they need to go instead of taking 1 step at a time. We have 2 of these cards, which most of my players just call the Broom, and this just puts more power into Garland's realm. Help him fuel all the cards that he needs to play. Now we're getting into the fiends, Lich, Carrie, Kraken, and Tiamat. Each fiend is a pretty powerful ally, they're strength 4, and each one has a special ability where if you start your turn in a location that has the matching orb, you gain power from moving. So this is just more incentive to get the orbs and the fiends on the board. If you can do that, you've got to get the fiends out anyway, but if you've used the orb to get the fiend out, that orb's already there, and then you can still take advantage of it. But if you get the fiend out first, there still may be a reason to put the orb out so you can take advantage of this power shuffle. Garland also has just a lot of standard allies. Because killing heroes is so central to his deck, I gave him 4 just generic enemies. There are imps and ogres. Imps are strength 2, ogres are strength 3. These are good to just nickel and dime heroes as they come out, but we also have these 2 sorcerers. If you've played Final Fantasy I, you know how absolutely horrific this monster is. Only strength 1, which means they're going to need help to defeat a hero, but if you do defeat a hero, and remember, Light Warriors are heroes, and you use the sorcerer to do it, you can defeat another hero in the same location. That's useful for Garland because when he gets fated, heroes tend to stack up 2,000 years ago because that blocks him from his objective. So he has a way to deal with that. We also have, of course, the Warmech, who's just an incredibly powerful ally, and Garland can spend power to leave Warmech in play when it defeats a hero. And finally, we have the most powerful card in Garland's deck, Astos. Astos is a 1-strength ally. You're not going to use him to vanquish a hero directly, but he's got an activate that can either defeat a hero outright or remove it from the game. If you can get Astos on the board and positioned well, people are going to have a much harder time fading you and putting Light Warriors on the board where you don't want them. We also have 2 of these cards. These are conditions, knock you all down. This also removes a Light Warrior from the game, and it's not really something other players can do anything about because it's in your hand and you play it on their turn when they defeat a hero. They have to defeat heroes to win, so there's always this threat in the game. The caveat here is that you can only remove Light Warriors from your Fate deck, and it's not guaranteed because you're looking at your Fate deck, and if you don't draw a Light Warrior, then this card is a bust. Next we have Cure 4. Cure 4 is a way to get an ally or a fiend out of your discard pile. If you need to use a fiend to vanquish a Light Warrior, you can use this card to get them back out later. We have another condition here, Master of Chaos. This is a special condition that, again, lets you go through your villain deck or discard pile for a fiend. The caveat here is you have to play it to the Temple of Fiends. You can't play it to 2,000 years ago where you want it, so hopefully you've got that floater. And finally, we have Garland's other condition, Turncloak. This one, if another player has more items in the realm, you can go fishing in your villain deck looking for orbs. So Garland has a lot of options to go into his deck and look for the cards that he wants to play. And he needs all those options because there's a lot of cards that he needs to play, and because his Fate deck is fairly punitive. Let's go ahead and look at this. So first and foremost, we have the 6 Light Warriors. Each of these Light Warriors is terrible for Garland. I'm not going to go through each one individually, but if any of these Light Warriors are played to 2,000 years ago, he can't win the game. And this Black Mage especially is bad because it can single-handedly take out pretty much any ally Garland has on the board. And if you really have not been diligent in removing Light Warriors from your realm, Black Mage can even take out a Fiend. There are a couple other heroes in the deck. Here we have Princess Sarah. She moves all the Light Warriors to her location. So if you're in a late game situation where Garland has moved Light Warriors all over his realm, you can play Princess Sarah to 2,000 years ago and they all move back. And then we have the Circle of Sages here, which just makes allies less effective. We have 2 of these class changes. These make Light Warriors trickier to defeat. This really incentivizes Garland to find a way to use Astos or knock you all down rather than vanquish actions. We have Life 2 and Nuke. These are the 2 most powerful spells in Final Fantasy. Nuke is really good because it can just defeat allies in a location, and Life 2 is really good because you play it to a hero and Garland has to defeat that hero twice, essentially. Again, this is really incentivizing Garland to find a way around that when you defeat a hero clause by using Knock You All Down or Astos. And finally, we've got some breathing room for Garland. There are 3 of these cards in the deck, Power of the Orbs. And you discard an orb from Garland's realm. Usually a Garland player will get an orb out and activate it on the same turn. So when you Fate Garland and you draw Power of the Orbs, usually that's breathing room for Garland. There's 3 of these in the deck to increase the chance of Garland smoothing away from a Fate action like that. So I mentioned that Garland is a very interesting place in the game, and the reason for that is because there's so much power in his deck, and because he has so many great cards, and because he has so many moving parts to be aware of. All of the playtesters, myself included, who have played this deck, say it feels really strong, but when I look at the actual playtesting statistics, Garland almost never wins. This is a very difficult deck to win with, both alongside the core Disney villains and alongside the other Final Fantasy villains that we're testing. And I think having so many playtesters say that the deck is incredibly powerful and fun, even though it doesn't have a good win rate, is kind of a good place for it to be in. It's a very technical deck, and you feel like you're getting better at it the more you play it. So I think this Garland deck is in something like its final state, which is why I'm making the video on it now. I do want to give a quick shout out to my boy Treble. When we were first making these decks, he whipped up a placeholder Garland deck using Final Fantasy I graphics at a time when I was planning to use graphics and names and things from Final Fantasy Dawn of Souls, but he beat some sense into me. He made me realize that, yeah, the NES, the 8-bit graphics is the way to go on this deck, and I'm really glad we make that call, because it makes Garland feel very unique when he's at the table with all the other Final Fantasy villains. I have been saying that I'm going to release the Steam mod of Villainous Final Fantasy to the public, so you guys can all download it into Tabletop Simulator for yourself. I'm going to do that once I have 4 villains to play with. Garland is the 3rd. It's looking like the 4th completed deck that I make a video about is going to be Sin from Final Fantasy X. And as soon as that's done, you'll see the Sin video on this channel, and then there will be download links in all of these videos to the Tabletop Simulator workshop where you can download the mod and try it for yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you when Sin's ready to go.